Yo, this is the Scarcity Studios YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. And our sponsors are Alpha Claims and Hire Birmingham, the leading and best accident management company. Get a replacement car anywhere in 1 hour. Robbie Lawlor, a name that everybody in Ireland is familiar with. After speaking to people that he knew in his childhood, I discovered he was raised in Darndale and the Donemead area of Dublin. And as a teen, he started to get involved in petty crime, car theft, and like so many, trying to obtain material status to come away from poverty. And in an area with such high unemployment, and drug dealers are always hiring new recruits, Robbie gained a reputation for violence as a young teenager and became involved with serious gangsters in the city. To really understand who Robbie Lawlor was as a person and how he became involved in one of the most shocking murders in Irish history and met his fate on April the 4th in 2020, you have to go back to 2005. The murder of Mark Byrne, the first documented one that was connected to Robbie Lawlor. Mark Byrne was a drug dealer in the Tallaght area of the city and had gotten into an argument with Robbie Lawlor in Mountjoy Prison in 2005. The police believed that this was the motive for the murder. Mark had been freed from the North Dublin prison on day release when he was killed. He was scheduled for full release in August and was due back in prison on that evening. He was on temporary release on compassionate grounds, so he'd probably lost a relative. He was approached by another man on the corner of Berkeley Road and Eccles Street at 5 to 10 in the morning. The attacker shot him 3 times in the face, once in the head, before escaping on foot. The injured man was tended to on the scene by a medical team, but died at around 10:45 AM. There was a number of witnesses to the attack that happened on a busy street filled with traffic and pedestrians. This was a brutal example of Robbie's vengeance, and that would only grow, and in 2009 he began to get further involved in the criminal underworld. In his childhood estate of Darndale, there was a young man known as B.A. His real name was Anthony Ayodeji. He was left in a critical condition from a gun attack in which a baby's life was put at risk. 2 people was arrested and Robbie Lawlor was one of these people. Anthony was of Lebanese descent and he was looking after a female friend's 22-month-old baby in a friend's car when a man ran up to the car and fired 5 shots through the driver's seat window. The baby, who was either on the victim's lap or on the passenger seat, received minor injuries just underneath the baby's eye. The attack, which occurred in Darndale, North Dublin, last Friday evening, shocked the local community as well as the police. They described the shooting as reckless. It shows the level of callousness involved, a total disregard for the baby. The police were satisfied the shooting was over a personal grievance, which had racist elements, they said, and was not in any way linked to gangland activity or drug dealing. It emerged yesterday that a relative of the baby who was serving a sentence in prison for a serious crime went berserk to hear the news of the actual suspect, that they believed it was Robbie Lawlor. People even said to the papers at the time of this attack, all the way back in 2008, that Robbie Lawlor was even meant to have apologised for nearly killing the child. This demonstrated his reckless nature and his tendency to switch and try to kill people. He fired 5 shots into that car. He could quite easily have killed Anthony Ayodeji. And the murder that was connected to Robbie, that would go on to have the biggest effect on his life, was in 2009. The murder of David Fred Lynch, rest in peace. He was known to the police as an associate of the leaders of one of the rival factions. Lynch was from Coolock and had previously sustained injuries after being shot outside a pub in 2006. He was also one of the prime suspects in a North Dublin shooting as well. An initial examination of the body indicated that Lynch had been shot 3 times in the head with a handgun. His body was found in a pool of blood in Wasteland at 4 PM yesterday. The grim find was made by a woman walking her dog in the local area. The body was laying ridden in undergrowth for several hours, hidden from the balconies of the apartments just yards away. Cars cannot access the wasteland, they said, which overlooks the only road onto it. The raised section of ground where Lynch was found is less than half a mile from where he lived. Last night, the Gardaí was trying to establish if Lynch had been lured to the field or had been murdered elsewhere, and his body was then dumped there. Robbie was connected to this murder. Officers suspected that Lynch had received a phone call at a hotel where he was staying at on Sunday, asking him to meet him on Balcamp Lane to plan the attack on a rival gang in an increasingly violent Darndale drugs war. But it was thought that Lynch turned up to his associate and they pulled a gun and shot him 4 times in the head. The suspected hitman remained in custody, and Robbie Lawlor was 24 at this time. Under the new legislation brought in for gangs that allows detectives to quiz them for a week, the police may go to the Dublin court to apply for more time as well. The man's girlfriend was also remanded in custody, but she was not connected directly to the murder. She's been questioned on suspicion of withholding information. The pair was arrested at a city centre hotel, and the man was detained for a murder attempt last year arranged by Lynch's own gang. They believed back then that Robbie Lawlor was a gun for hire. He had worked for both sides of the Darndale drugs feud, and the shooting last year in which a man was shot and injured in broad daylight in front of his child is believed to have been ordered by the associates of Lynch. This showed Robbie was capable of even hurting his friends. 1 year later, Noel Dean. He owed a lot of money for cannabis, and Robbie was alleged to have been his friend and also was the man that they hired to kill him. He was the chief suspect in the murder, and it was later revealed during the inquiry that Robbie Lawlor was meant to have drank tea with the mother of the victim, Noel Dean, after he had killed her son, in a twisted act of treachery, it said. Robbie went on the run in England after a gun cartridge was found with the names of 3 police officers engraved onto it. All of these police officers were investigating Robbie Lawlor for connections to murders. They said that the dangerous Kulak criminal is believed to be heavily involved in 2 other gangland murders and a number of reckless gun attacks and armed robberies. A source explained that the individual is a complete nutcase, they said, a loose cannon. The fact he sat down and drank tea with the mother of his victim, how cold-hearted is that? It is believed that the notorious gunman murdered Dean over a cannabis debt. Detective Inspector Scott said that on the night of Dean's death, he had been at a funeral arising from a totally separate incident. There was a traveller's christening also on at the time, with up to 600 people present, and another christening in a different part of the pub. The police have gone through CCTV footage to identify people that was there and all the potential witnesses. There was 40 people that was never identified, and nobody ever wrote a statement to say that they seen Robbie Lawlor pull the trigger on that murder. Robbie Lawlor has 125 convictions. One of them in 2013 was for a cash box that he stole from McDonald's in Donemead, during which a handgun was pulled out at a security guard and the money was stolen. If he wasn't debt collecting or shooting people, he was into armed robberies, which is another part of his psychotic nature, said detectives involved in cases. Lawlor received a 30-month sentence, slightly less than his accomplice, and the sentence was reduced to 23 months after appeal. Robbie Lawlor was usually in and out of prison. He did a lot of prison sentences, mainly for traffic offences, to be honest, but they always tried to keep him in for as long as possible. The IRA had a massive influence on the underworld in Ireland, and 2 brothers, Alan Ryan and Vincent Ryan, were regarded as senior figures in the real IRA. They were both shot dead in North Dublin. Shots were fired at Ryan's funeral in apparent show of strength. The men's attire included green military-style jumpers and combat trousers, along with scarves covering their faces, dark sunglasses and black berets. They were believed to have kept the peace between the gangs and also extorted the dealers, but the IRA never dealt drugs. With their death, the power balance moved to the notorious Mr. Big, who was connected to the murder but could not be named for legal reasons. He was from Kulak, and his main right-hand man, alleged hitman, was Ken Finn. He was alleged to have been responsible for the murder of the notorious IRA brothers. The battle for control in Ireland, Dublin and the border towns began. Cornelius Price is from a travelling family. He was jailed for assault police and believed to be a feared presence in Ireland, along with his friend and fellow traveller Owen Maguire. In 2015, before he would clash with Robbie, he was connected to various different murders. The gang that he was associated to was alleged to have been involved in different murders. One of them was the death of Willie Morn and his girlfriend back in 2015. Mr. Morn's heartbroken father spoke of his devastation as the searches for their body yielded no results. William Morn's father alleged that the Irish gangster had been saying that their bodies would never be found, and they was totally cremated in a massive bonfire in County Meath just hours after the murder. Cornelius Price was the prime suspect in the death of Willie Moore, and he was searched, and his houses and property was searched outside of prison, and his prison cells searched while he was in prison too. His father made a heartfelt appeal for the body of his son in 2015, and the response was an example of the violent lengths that Cornelius's associates would go to prevent that from happening. They dug up the grave of Willie's brother in Teller and firebombed his sister's house.
I'm putting an appeal out tonight on behalf of my son that went missing on the 14th of the 4th, 2015. My son was last heard on a phone at 2:25 on the same day in question. That's the last time my son was heard alive. I'm asking people out there in all communities if they have any little bit of information where my son lies and his girlfriend. I appreciate that, and my prayers will be with me.
Nothing else was ever spoken about in regard to this murder. During this period of time after Robbie had come out of prison, he'd fathered 2 children with his partner of 12 years. He was to become a family man for a period of time, and the only thing that you can be certain of is that Robbie loved his children. You could see in the pictures that I'd seen, he spoke highly of them as well in his captions on social media. He would have come across to his kids, I imagine, as funny and spontaneous. And I imagine that they would not have seen any other side to him that everybody else had seen. That would not be the last that he would be involved in the dispute in Coolock, and he was dragged back into it. Mr. Finn, and he was the man that was meant to go to kill Richard Carberry in connection to Mr. Big's gang, and he angered Robbie, who beat him to the draw and was alleged to have murdered Mr. Finn in Dublin in February 2018. Finn didn't die instantly. Even though he was shot in the head, he died 3 days later in hospital. Lawlor was arrested but never charged in connection with this murder. Finn was held in high regard by the Coolock gang, and his death infuriated, allegedly, Mr. Big and Robbie Lawlor, a sworn enemy, but also showed how dangerous Robbie was. He killed a professional and was prepared to do it again. Richard Carberry, Robbie's brother-in-law, was originally from Coolock also. He lived in County Louth, and he was alleged to have been a major player in the DROGHEDA drug war for 10 years and was about to move to Manchester and take himself out of the involvement. In March 2008, his house was shot up and he had bulletproof windows installed to protect his wife and kids. This has never been discussed before in the media, but in April 2018, shortly after the murder of Finn, Robbie decided to go on a trip around the world. He went to various locations, but 2 of them included Rome and even Bethlehem. He was with Richard Carberry's children and I think his wife as well during this trip, showing how close he was to Richie during his time in Drogheda.
It doesn't look like a cave right now because it was turned into a chapel, but it's a natural cave where Jesus was born. On the right hand side you will see a star on the floor. 14 corners of a star, 14 generations from Adam to Jesus, 14 stations on the way across. That star on the right hand side down on the floor, it marks the exact
He made a grand gesture of buying a dozen football kits for poor kids in the area and then photographed them as well. I think Robbie had ideas in the future to maybe become involved in some sort of charity work abroad. In what aspect or what capacity, we would never know. This just showed another side to Robbie and his bizarre nature.
Yeah. PSG, Chelsea, Bayern Munich. يا ريال مدريد.
والله الدنيا
نيمار دا سيلفا.
شو هذه؟ ريال هاي.
البسوهن ايه والبسوهن. البسوا البلايز البسوا البلايز. البسها هيو. البس البلوزة. بس البلوزة.
Shortly after returning from his trip, his life took a turn for the worst. The mother of his 2 children had started a new relationship, and Robbie was not happy, and he showed the jealous side in May. Miss Kerwan, his ex, and Derek Mitchell, her new partner, started a relationship in 2017. Mr. Lawlor didn't find out about it until Christmas 2017. When Mr. Lawlor found out about her former partner's relationship, he began a campaign of threats and intimidation, she said, to get her to break up with Mr. Mitchell. This accumulated in the attempted murder of Mr. Mitchell's mother. The lawyer said that Mr. Mitchell's mother was getting ready to go to bed, and she heard the dog barking in the back garden at around 1 AM in the morning. On May the 26th, 2018, she looked out of a window. She saw 2 men, one with a gun in his hand, coming over the wall, and one in the back garden. Mr. O'Kelly told the court that she recognised the man and said it was Mr. Lawlor. Mr. Mitchell's mother also told the police that at some stage the dog had been barking and raising the alarm, and that's why they killed him. She told them that the gunman was Robert Lawlor immediately after they arrived. She was in no doubt, and she'd been receiving indirect threats from him in previous months. Mr. Lawlor was not prepared to accept the continued relationship between Mr. Mitchell and his former partner. They told the jury that CCTV evidence does not identify the gunman and does show 2 men walk past another house close by the Mitchell household just before the attack and getting away a few minutes later. She said they had come to kill Derek's mother and come back 2 weeks later to kill Derek. That was what Robbie Lawlor's ex had said in court. There is contradicting time frames in this story. Some media outlets say that Robbie Lawlor spent the rest of his time from this point till 2019 in prison, but others say that he wasn't in prison. He was either out on bail for a period of time, because with Robbie's personal life in a mess and a death warrant on his head in Kulak, he started to spend more time in Drogheda, and along with a few associates tried to take over the drug market in the town. This would only anger Mr. Big, Mr. Price and Maguire, and even more of them, and the only way to resolve it was to try to kill them. It was alleged that he was part of or ordered the attack on July the 5th, 2018. In one of the key shootings in the feud, Owen Maguire was shot in the stomach and shoulder at least 6 times in an attack that happened in his Drogheda home. A senior source said that the attack was treated as attempted murder and that Maguire was extremely lucky to be alive. Maguire suffered injuries to his legs and wrists in the botched hit, and he's been treated at hospital in Drogheda. It emerged that one of the 6 bullets fired at him lodged in his spine, and sources said that he might have grave repercussions for his future health. Maguire is known to the police. His most serious conviction was 6 months ago, a suspended sentence for a fray committed near his home in Drogheda. Maguire's associate was the main people involved in a major operation by the Criminal Assets Bureau. During the course, they received thousands of pounds from properties connected to Owen Maguire, and Maguire's associates had been connected to various different attacks in the actual city, and a bank account linked to him was frozen with £100,000 in it. The attack left Owen Maguire paralysed, but he wasn't dead. And one source that emerged later on was that Robbie Lawlor was stopped by the police 1 hour after shooting Owen Maguire. Once he was stopped by the police, he was driving his car in his boxer shorts and he was covered in petrol. He was only pulled over because he was driving at high speeds with a flat tyre, they said. Detectives believed he was semi-naked and he'd burnt the clothes in a botched attempt after shooting Maguire in 2018, and that he had doused himself in petrol to remove any evidence of the shooting. And this would stem a series of attacks that would take place across Ireland. In November 2018, a man was found stripped, beaten and stabbed in a house in Moneymore Estate. A rival gang had abducted him, and after the police had rescued him, the fire brigade dealt with a burning car that had gas cylinders inside it. The abduction happened 24 hours after an arson attack had also destroyed a car. In Lawrence Park, the Moneymore Estate also, there was a following day, there was more petrol bombings. Brendan Maguire's brother of Owen was also shot on the 28th of February 2019. He was walking out of a toy shop on the M1 retail park in broad daylight. He spent a number of weeks in hospital, but he also survived the shooting like his brother. In 2018, October, Robbie was in prison, allegedly for traffic offences, but then other publications say he would have been in prison for the attempted murder. The North Dubliner was targeted by Cornelius Price and 2 other inmates in a Cork prison attack. He needed 29 stitches, they said, and extensive injuries did not require hospital treatment. Prison officials believe he was approached by Price, who shook his hand and held onto it, while 2 other thugs understood to be from Waterford stabbed him repeatedly. He's under investigation for several recent murders and gun attacks in the city. So all this time, Robbie Lawlor was in prison, and in November, Richard Carberry, his brother-in-law, was gunned down. He was killed outside his home. The 39-year-old was closing the gate of his house in Bettystown, County Meath, on November the 4th, 2019. This was days before he was meant to move to Britain. He was hit at least 3 times by a gunman who sprayed bullets at him from a machine gun pistol. Another 3 rounds hit his Audi car. His wife and daughter tried to help him until paramedics arrived. He was taken to hospital in Drogheda, but died 1 hour later.
Gardaí were summoned to the scene here at Castlemartin Estate, where a 39-year-old male was found on the footpath behind me here. He had been shot. He had just returned home to his house here, and while he was getting out of his car and closing his gate, we believe he was approached at that time by 1 or more individuals. In firing the shots at him, 3 cars were struck in the estate here, one opposite.
And this would have been devastating news to Robbie Lawlor and would definitely have had a massive effect on his mental health. In August 2019, Keith Brannigan was stalked by his killers for weeks, and he was another one connected to Richard Carberry. Investigators probing the death said that he was connected to a major gangland player in the area and was shot dead in a caravan park in County Louth last Tuesday afternoon. The police believe he was targeted simply because of his friendship to the gangster. 2 other people and a pregnant woman narrowly missed being hit by bullets. With these 2 different murders, people around Robbie were being killed while he was in prison, and his life was falling apart, and his personal life was even worse. He had money on his head, and he was even more unpredictable than ever. He had nothing to lose, and while he was in prison, he was secretly recorded by the police saying that he believed that Mr. Big was behind the murder of Richard Carberry. December the 9th, 2019. Lawlor was found not guilty by a jury of threatening to murder his former girlfriend's partner and attempting to murder his mother. He was also acquitted of possessing a gun and of also killing a dog. He was acquitted of all 5 charges, including the attempted murder following a trial with his ex-girlfriend, Miss Kerwan. She retracted her statement towards the end of the trial. In it, she said that Lawlor had followed her and a fella and wanted to kill Fiona Mitchell. They said that Lawlor had a fearsome reputation in prison, and other prisoners were genuinely afraid of him. Because Lawlor had beat this case miraculously, the police had put an order out across Dublin to not approach this man and deal with him in caution to all police officers. Detectives believed that Lawlor would go to war with Mr. Big's drugs mob because they were chief suspects in the murder. By the time that Robbie had come out of prison, Mr. Big, Owen and Price had all joined forces. Their common enemy and the bounty on his head as it had increased significantly. Robbie was losing control and most importantly respect, and this must have left him paranoid and untrusting. Shortly after his release, he was going to the gym on an Irish high street. At this moment, Robbie Lawlor's past came back in the form of a ghost. In front of him was the son of one of the alleged murder victims from over 10 years ago, David Lynch. Many regarded David Lynch as Robbie's friend and that Robbie had betrayed him, and this was the offspring of David finding the revenge. They hit Robbie, and the words that was exchanged,
"That's only the start of it. That's only the start of it, Robbie.
That's just the start of it. The last time that Cian Woods was seen was on the 12th of January 2020 at 6 p.m. on St Dominic's Bridge in Drogheda. He recently called his mother to ask her to leave money on the side for a taxi. On the 13th of January 2020, a local man found a sports bag with the human remains of a child at the junction of Moteville Gardens and Moteview Drive in Coolock. The bag had been thrown in the dark-coloured passing car. The remains were found at around 10 p.m. Further human remains, believed to be that of a head and hands, were found in a burnt-out car in Trinity Terrace in Drumcondra in the early hours of Wednesday, the 15th of January. This sent shockwaves through Ireland and disgust to the brutal beheading of a 17-year-old boy. The police believed that Robbie and his gang had taken him to a house in Rathmullen, and the footage of the torture that I had seen was some of the worst that I'd ever seen in my life. They was meant to have gone to deliver the head to Cornelius Price with a note that was meant to have been in the bag that said this is only the start of it. The bag also contained flip-flops that was symbolic of the disrespect shown by the youngers to Robbie that day, and a message to anyone else that dared to cross him and his gang. Detectives working on the case have no cause of death to Cian Woods, and the inquiry to the fatal injury is believed to have been dealt to the torso, but because they never found the torso, they can't rule out the possibility that he was disposed of deliberately to frustrate the inquiry. Prosecutions have proven to be difficult without the remains of the body and a cause of death. Even with Robbie as a prime suspect in the disappearance of Cian Woods, he didn't run away, he didn't even hide, he drank locally in pubs. Locals in the area, officials and MPs tried to march for peace in Drogheda to try to attempt to find some sort of normality, and maybe just a way to try to show the media that they was doing something. In the meantime, Robbie Lawlor was issued with a Gardaí warning message telling him that his life was in danger.
What's your name? Lou. And how much did he give you?
About 8 quid, 10.
But that's all the change we had, because look at, is she not the image of Eddie Uzel? No, come here. But at the end of the day, look at I fucking car out. Lou, that's acting the bollocks. What have you got to say, Lou?
Thank you, thank you.
No, look, it's a pleasure meeting you. Okay, now look after yourself. And what are you going to do with that tonight?
I'm going to put it towards
Oh, yes. Well, do that. Well, look, give us a one. Right, look after yourself, Lou. Right? Well, I promise you I'll go to Lou every day.
Saturday, April the 4th, Belfast. Robbie Lawlor, along with 3 other men, travelled to Ardoyne in Belfast to collect a drug debt. It is here that he met his gruesome end. After pulling up with gunmen, he was sprayed with bullets and instantly died, and the 3 men he came with fled. A neighbour ran over to try to help him, and he died at the scene. The neighbour would then go on to post on social media how he had stood with him for 30 minutes while he bled out. Robbie died a brutal and painful death. 4 suspects were later arrested and questioned. It is understood one of them is close leader of a Limerick gang, with another one related to a Republican dissident gang. The main theory being explored, Lawlor's enemies in Drogheda persuaded the McCarthy-Dundon gang with £100,000 to betray him. They alleged that they gave him fake bullets in a bid to take him to Belfast to collect a debt, and this showed that Robbie Lawlor was still not scared. He was still prepared to go out and debt collect and do what he usually did. Robbie Lawlor was dead and Dublin celebrated, and this wasn't an understatement. They actually partied. In the schemes in Darndale, locals told that they were celebrating for days.
The video. It says to Robbie Lawlor, boys, rest in peace. He's not even worth saying rest in peace, but fair play to you. Here you go, boys. Captain Morgan. Captain Morgan.
What's up, man? I'm after just getting the word that apparently came from Belfast through one of your Belfast Dublin friends, right? And they said, "Hey, fuck, your friend was on his way to do a hit, and he was armed. The fella he was about to shoot was armed. Basically, what I got told was 2 fellas shot, but Robbie didn't survive."
Robbie had taken so much from so many, and that was the problem with Robbie Lawlor. If Robbie Lawlor had been found guilty of even some of the murders he was connected to, he would have been a serial killer by definition. He ticked a lot of boxes that psychologists would give for serial killers, and Ireland is a dangerous place, and wars have been going on over money and reputations and respect, and young men have been getting involved in, and there needs to be better role models in Ireland. But the Irish government also needs to try to encourage kids to come away from gang life and educate them better on it, because the media always focuses on the London gangs, but they never focus on other gangs, even though this is an international problem and it covers all races.
Of services from the statutory side, and we have had the exact same budget, basically give or take, since we started in 2010. Our budget is very, very small.
Tisha, is there anything new you can do here today, or is this just a photo op, really?
Well, you know, I think in terms of new things that we can do, and this builds on what's been done before, first of all is additional Garda resources. We've pledged that there will be an extra 700 Gardaí recruited every year. Fine Gael is the party of law and order, and people know that. I really want to say to people across the country, and also people here in Drogheda, that crime doesn't pay.
So I really appreciate you joining me today. Please pay your respects to Cian Woods and everybody that lost their life in the feuds. Peace.